I caught my husband and his secretary tangled in our bed. He had the audacity to grin and say, "This isn't what it looks like." By the end of the night, that grin, and everything he thought he could get away with, was gone. I never thought my life would unravel like this, not in such a brutal, humiliating way. People always assume betrayal sneaks up on you, that there are warning signs, little clues scattered along the way. But sometimes, it crashes down in one earth-shattering moment, ripping the ground from beneath you before you even have a chance to brace for impact. That's exactly how it happened to me. The day had started like any other. A morning coffee, a quick kiss on Robert's cheek before he left for work, a casual text exchange about dinner plans. Nothing unusual, nothing that screamed my world was about to explode. I had no reason to suspect anything when I arrived home earlier than expected. It was a spontaneous decision, really. I had finished work sooner than I thought, skipped an unnecessary lunch meeting, and decided to surprise my husband. Maybe we could have a quiet evening together, something we hadn't done in a while. I even stopped by his favorite bakery on the way. Something sweet, something to remind us of better days. But fate had a cruel sense of humor. The second I stepped inside, something felt off. The house was quiet, too quiet. The kind of silence that doesn't belong in a home filled with life and love. I frowned, setting the paper bag on the counter, and called out, "Robert?" No answer. That was strange. His car was in the driveway, so I knew he was here. A distant rustling upstairs sent a shiver down my spine. It was faint, almost insignificant, but something deep in my gut told me to listen. My feet moved before my brain caught up, guiding me towards our bedroom. Each step felt heavier, an invisible force pushing against me, whispering that whatever was waiting behind that door wasn't meant to be seen. I should have turned around. I should have left while my world was still intact. But I didn't. The door was slightly ajar, just enough to offer me a sliver of the nightmare inside. And there they were. Robert, my husband of 10 years, standing in the bedroom we built together, his hands tangled in another woman's hair. Their lips moved in sync, his fingers gripping her waist like she belonged to him, like I never had. Time froze. My lungs refused to cooperate. My pulse thundered in my ears, and for a split second, I convinced myself that I was hallucinating. That stress had finally broken me, making me see things that weren't real. But then Robert opened his eyes. I watched it happen in slow motion, the flicker of realization, the brief flash of horror, and then, just as quickly, the carefully constructed mask of indifference. He pulled away from her like it was nothing, like I was the one interrupting him. Taylor, his secretary, stumbled slightly, her face a shade paler as she turned to look at me. Silence, a suffocating, unbearable silence stretched between us. Then Robert, in all his arrogance, had the audacity to speak first. "Madison," he said, straightening his tie like he had just been caught in a meeting, not wrapped around another woman. "This isn't what it looks like." I laughed. I actually laughed. It was hollow, humorless. The kind of laugh that comes when your brain can't quite process the level of absurdity in front of you. "Not what it looks like?" I repeated, my voice sharper than I intended. "Robert, I walked in on you making out with your secretary in our bedroom, so please, enlighten me. What exactly does it look like?" Taylor took a nervous step back, her hands clutched together in front of her like a child caught misbehaving. She looked young, too young. A cliché wrapped in blonde curls and cheap perfume. I wondered if she knew what she had stepped into, if she understood that the man she was clinging to was a liar, a coward, a master manipulator who would sell her out the second it suited him. Robert sighed, rubbing his temples as if he was the one inconvenienced here. "Look, let's not be dramatic. It was a mistake, all right? A lapse in judgment. A lapse in judgment? I echoed, my voice dangerously low. My hands were shaking now, not from sadness, but from the sheer force of trying to control my rage. You mean to tell me that you accidentally ended up kissing your assistant? In our bedroom? He exhaled sharply, like he had better things to do than explain himself to his wife. Madison, you're overreacting. If we could just sit down and... Overreacting? I snapped. You think I'm overreacting? I took a slow step forward, my gaze locked onto his. Robert, I have given you 10 years of my life. I built this home with you. I trusted you. And now, I walk in to find you shoving your tongue down someone else's throat. And you have the nerve to stand there and act like I'm the problem? His expression darkened, the carefully controlled charm slipping ever so slightly. I'm not doing this with you right now, he muttered, running a hand through his hair. I felt something inside me snap. Of course you're not, I said, my voice eerily calm. Because that would require taking responsibility, and we both know you're incapable of that. Taylor shifted awkwardly, looking between us like she had suddenly realized she was in the middle of something much bigger than her cheap affair. I turned to her then, my lips curling into something that might have been a smile under different circumstances. You, I said, my tone dripping with icy amusement. Did he tell you he loved you? That he was unhappy? That I was the villain in some made-up story? She hesitated, her lips parting slightly, but no words came out. Robert groaned. Madison, leave her out of this. Oh, now you want to protect her? I laughed again, shaking my head. That's rich. You didn't mind dragging her into our marriage, but now that things are messy, you suddenly care about her feelings, Izzy? Jaw clenched. This isn't helping anyone. No, I agreed. But it sure as hell is helping me. For the first time since I had stepped into that room, I felt in control. The heartbreak was still there, a dull ache threatening to consume me, but something else had taken its place. Something colder, sharper, and far more dangerous. I looked at Robert, my voice calm, but firm. You'll regret this, I said simply. I promise you that. And with that, I turned on my heel and walked away, leaving him and his pathetic little mistress standing in the wreckage of what used to be our life. I drove aimlessly for what felt like hours, the city lights blurring together as my mind replayed the scene over and over again. Every detail, Robert's arrogant smirk, the way Taylor had looked at me like I was the intruder, the sheer audacity of it all, looped in my head like a cruel film reel. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. But I didn't cry. Not yet. The pain was there, clawing at my chest, demanding to be felt, but I refused to give in to it. Not in that moment. Not while the anger was still, fresh, still alive, fueling me with a sense of purpose I didn't quite understand yet. I needed to be smart about this, deliberate, precise. Revenge wasn't just about reacting, it was about strategy. I pulled into an empty parking lot, resting, my forehead against the steering wheel as I forced myself to breathe. There was a time when I would have crumbled at the thought of my husband betraying me, when the sheer weight of it would have left me gasping for air. But this was different. This wasn't sadness. This was war. And in war, you don't act on impulse. You plan. I reached for my phone, scrolling past the dozens of missed calls from Robert. He must have realized by now that I wasn't coming home, that I wasn't going to play the part of the devastated wife who would forgive and forget. Good. Let him sweat. Instead, I dialed the one person who knew me better than I knew myself. Madison? Emily's voice was groggy, laced with concern. It's almost midnight. What's wrong? The words sat heavy on my tongue. Saying them out loud would make them real. I caught Robert cheating. Silence. Then a sharp intake of breath. That son of a... I don't need comfort. I cut in, gripping the phone tighter. I need clarity. I need to think. Emily didn't ask questions. She didn't tell me to go home or beg me to sleep on it. She knew me too well for that. Instead, her voice turned steady, focused. All right. Tell me exactly what happened. So I did. Every detail. Every word. And by the time I finished, my hands weren't shaking anymore. You have leverage, Emily said after a moment. Use it. Leverage. I chewed on the word, letting it settle. She was right. Robert wasn't just any man. He was a man who built his entire identity around his career, his reputation, his status. And I had the power to destroy it. But that wasn't enough. Not yet. I wouldn't just ruin Robert. I would make sure he felt every ounce of the humiliation he had forced upon me. Madison? Emily's voice softened. What are you going to do? A slow, cold smile spread across my lips. Something he'll never forget. I didn't go home that night. Instead, I checked into a hotel, one of those upscale places Robert loved, the kind where everything smelled of money and artificial luxury. I used his credit card to pay for the suite, because why the hell not? Then, I slept. Not well, but enough. Enough to wake up with a clear mind and a plan forming. Step 1. Don't react emotionally. That's what Robert expected. That's what all men like him expect. That their wives will crumble, that they'll scream and beg and ultimately forgive. But I wasn't a wife anymore. I was a woman with nothing left to lose. Step 2. Gather intel. I spent the morning scrolling through Robert's social media, emails, work calendar, anything I could access. He was careless, always had been, and it didn't take long to find. Exactly what I needed. Meetings, appointments, his boss's contact information. Step 3. Execute. I took a deep breath, my fingers hovering over the keyboard before I finally typed the email. Subject: urgent. A matter concerning Robert Langston. Dear Mr. Holloway, I am reaching out regarding a situation that I believe directly impacts your firm's reputation. As Robert Langston's wife, I have always respected his dedication to your company. However, I can no longer ignore the ethical breach I witnessed firsthand. Last night, I discovered Robert engaging in an inappropriate relationship with his secretary, Taylor, within our home. I understand this may not be my place, but I felt it necessary to bring this to your attention, as it reflects not just on my marriage, but on your organization. Sincerely, Madison Langston. I stared at the screen for a long moment before hitting send. A part of me expected regret, hesitation, some lingering doubt. But there was none. Just a strange sense of calm, like I had finally taken control of something that had been slipping away for far too long. Now I just had to wait. The morning sun streamed through the hotel window, painting the room in warm golden hues. It should have been comforting. It should have felt like a new beginning. But instead, there was a weight in my chest that wouldn't lift. I had set things in motion. I had exposed Robert's betrayal to his boss, to the very man who held his career in his hands. And yet, an unsettling quiet had settled around me. Would it be enough? I reached for my phone, half expecting some kind of explosion. An angry call from Robert, a furious message from Taylor, maybe even a polite but cold email from Mr. Holloway, distancing himself from the whole mess. But my inbox was empty, my notifications silent. And then, just as I was about to question everything, my phone rang. Unknown number. I let it ring twice before answering. Madison Langston. There was a brief pause, the kind that stretched just long enough to make my heart hammer. Then, a deep, measured voice. "Mrs. Langston, this is Charles Holloway." I sat up straighter, my fingers tightening around the phone. "Mr. Holloway," I greeted, my voice smooth despite the nerves creeping into my bloodstream. "I just received your email," he said, his tone carefully neutral. "I wanted to speak with you directly before making any decisions." Decisions. The word sent a quiet thrill through me. "Of course," I said, keeping my voice even. "I understand this is a difficult position for you." There was another pause. "I won't ask how you found out. That's not my business. But I will say this. Robert has built a strong reputation at our firm. This kind of revelation isn't something I take lightly." I could tell he was weighing his words, trying to gauge just how much I knew, how much I was willing to do with that knowledge. "He brought this upon himself," I said simply. "I only thought it was fair that you knew the kind of man representing your company." A long exhale crackled through the phone. "You're not wrong." I waited, pulse steady, knowing this was the moment that would determine everything. "We have policies in place," Mr. Holloway finally continued. "This behavior violates several of them, including our ethical conduct agreements. There will be consequences." I allowed myself a slow breath. "I appreciate your integrity." He chuckled dryly. "Integrity has little to do with it. This is business, and Robert Langston just became a liability." My lips curled. "Thank you for taking the time to speak with me," I said, my voice laced with the satisfaction I didn't bother hiding. "Of course," Mr. Holloway replied. "I'll handle it from here." The call ended, and just like that, Robert's carefully curated world began to crumble. I set the phone down, my hands oddly steady. I had expected more hesitation, more resistance. After all, Robert had spent years charming his way through life, convincing people he was indispensable. But power was fickle, and men like Mr. Holloway didn't hesitate to cut ties when it suited them. I didn't go back home immediately. I wanted Robert to stew in the silence, to wonder where I was, to feel the creeping paranoia of uncertainty wrapping around his throat. Let him sit with the consequences of his actions. Let him think. But eventually I had to return, not for him, not for reconciliation, but to claim what was mine. I arrived at dusk, the sun bleeding into the horizon as I pulled into the driveway. His car was there, parked like it always was, as if nothing had changed, as if this was just another normal evening in our once perfect life. The audacity of it made my blood boil. Steeling myself, I stepped inside. The house smelled the same, wood polish, lavender from the diffuser in the hallway. But the air was different. He was waiting. Robert was sitting in the living room, one arm draped lazily over the couch, the other holding a whiskey glass that was almost empty. His tie was loosened, his sleeves rolled up. He looked like a man who had spent the entire day nursing a headache. "Ah, so you finally decided to come home," he drawled, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "Was starting to think you were never coming back." Smug. He was actually smug. I dropped my purse onto the entryway table and crossed my arms. "Not my home anymore, Robert. You made sure of that." He smirked, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Oh, come on, Madison. Are we really going to do this? Be dramatic?" I almost laughed. Dramatic. That's what he thought this was? "Tell me, Robert," I said, stepping closer, my voice laced with mock curiosity. "Did you practice this speech in the mirror before I got here? Or did you genuinely believe that sitting there with your overpriced whiskey would make me forget what you did?" His jaw twitched, the first crack in his confidence. He leaned forward, setting his glass down on the coffee table with a little too much force. "You went to Holloway," he accused. I shrugged. "I told you you'd regret it." His eyes darkened. "You don't understand what you've done." "Oh, but I do," I countered, tilting my head. I understand perfectly. You spent years crafting an image, a respectable, successful businessman, a loving husband. But the truth? The truth is that you're just another cliché. Another man who thought he could have everything and lose nothing. Robert exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. Madison, listen. No, you listen, I interrupted, my voice sharp. You are going to lose job, won't you? His silence was all the answer I needed. I felt a strange kind of satisfaction settle in my chest. I had wondered if Mr. Holloway would follow through, but clearly he had. Robert Langston, the golden boy, the office charmer, had been dethroned. He let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. You think this is a victory for you? Oh, it's not just a victory, I said, leaning against the wall, arms still crossed. It's a reckoning. His expression flickered with something I couldn't quite place. Rage, maybe, or fear. This was my career, Madison. You don't just recover from something like this. I feigned sympathy. Yeah, I imagine it's tough when your biggest skill is lying through your teeth. He shot up from the couch, closing the space between us in 2 strides. For a brief second, I saw the man I had once loved, the man who had whispered promises into my hair, who had sworn forever. But he wasn't that man anymore, and maybe he never had been. You think you won? He said, voice low, dangerous. I didn't flinch. I didn't step back. I met his gaze head on. I know I did. Something shifted in his expression then, a flicker of realization. He had underestimated me. Again. His breath was ragged, his fists clenched at his sides. You want to ruin me? Fine. But don't pretend you're above this. You got your revenge. What now? You just walk away? I let his words linger, let him think he was getting to me. Then, I smiled. Oh, Robert, I said, patting his chest like he was some pitiful creature. You really think I'm done? His face paled just slightly. Taylor was next. Robert thought he had gotten the worst of it. He was wrong. Because while he had lost his job, and whatever fragile sense of dignity he had left, Taylor was still walking around as if she had gotten away with it. And that didn't sit right with me. She had played a part in this. She had stepped into my home, tangled herself into my life, and now she thought she could move on unscathed. No, there were rules to this game, and she was about to learn that actions have consequences. I spent the next day gathering everything I needed. It wasn't difficult. Taylor was just as careless as Robert, if not more. Social media was a goldmine. There she was, posing at office events, sipping cocktails with people who had no idea she was sleeping her way to the top. There were tagged photos, check-ins, even gushing captions about her career growth. The irony was suffocating. But the best part? The one piece of information that tied everything together? Taylor wasn't just Robert's secretary. She was engaged. Oh, the audacity. Her fiancé, Daniel, was an investment banker. The kind of guy who looked like he ran 5 miles before breakfast and had a firm handshake that made other men feel inferior. He and Taylor had been together for 3 years, living in a high-rise apartment in the city, and he had no idea. Yet. I dressed carefully before heading to her office. Nothing too aggressive, nothing too obvious. I wanted to look effortless, untouchable. The kind of woman who didn't need to raise her voice to get what she wanted. The receptionist barely glanced at me as I strolled in, my heels clicking softly against the polished floor. I'm here to see Taylor Morgan, I said smoothly. The girl behind the desk hesitated. Do you have an appointment? I smiled. She'll want to see me. It was the kind of tone that brokered no argument. Minutes later, Taylor stepped into the lobby, her face draining of color the second she saw me, Madison. Her voice was tight, controlled, but I saw the way her fingers trembled at her sides. I tilted my head. "Taylor, we need to talk." She hesitated. I could see the gears turning in her head, trying to decide whether to stand her ground or bolt. Gave her a choice. "We can do this here, in front of everyone," I said, letting my voice carry just enough to make a few heads turn. "Or we can step outside." That did it. She swallowed hard and nodded, leading me toward a quieter hallway, near the elevators. The moment we were alone, I leaned against the wall, crossing my arms. "I assume you know why I'm here." She nodded, arms wrapped around herself like a shield. "Look, No excuses," I cut in. "No fake apologies." I took a step closer, watching her shrink under my gaze. "I'm not here to hear you justify anything. I'm here to let you know that I know everything." Her throat bobbed as she swallowed. I know about Daniel." The words hit her like a slap. She flinched. "You... Oh, yes." I smiled. "I know about the engagement, the apartment, the wedding website you started but never finished." I let out a small laugh. "Tell me, does he know what kind of woman he's about to marry?" She shook her head, her breath quickening. "Madison, please." "Please what?" I said, tilting my head. "Please don't tell him. Please don't ruin your life the way you helped ruin mine." Tears welled in her eyes. "It wasn't... Oh, it was," I said, cutting her off before she could even begin her pathetic defense. "You knew exactly what you were doing. You weren't some helpless bystander, Taylor. You walked into my home, into my marriage, knowing damn well what you were doing." Her lips parted, but no words came out. I exhaled slowly, letting the silence stretch between us. "But I'll give you a chance," I finally said. Her eyes snapped up to mine, hope flickering across her face. "A chance," I nodded. "A chance to do the right thing." I pulled my phone out, scrolling until I found the contact I had saved earlier. Daniel Morgan. His number was easy to find. Taylor had mentioned him enough times in posts, and a little digging led me to the rest. Her face went sheet white as I tapped the screen, the dial tone ringing between us. "No," she whispered. I held up a hand. "Shh." 1 ring, 2. Then, "Hello?" A deep voice, smooth and confident. "Daniel?" I said sweetly. "This is Madison Langston. I believe we have something important to discuss." Taylor's breath hitched, her eyes wide with panic. And just like that, her world crumbled. It was done. I expected Robert to fight back, to scramble, to claw his way out of the mess he had created. Men like him, arrogant, self-important, deluded, never believed they could lose. They built their castles on charm and manipulation, convinced that no matter what, they'd always land on their feet. But Robert wasn't landing anywhere. He was falling, and I made sure there was nothing to break his fall. It started with his job. Losing that was the first real punch to his ego. The moment he realized that I had been serious when I said he'd regret this. Holloway hadn't wasted time. By noon the next day, Robert was escorted out of the office like some lowly intern who had stolen company supplies. No farewell party, no sympathetic glances. Just a firm handshake from security and a box of his belongings. By the time he got home, his voice was raw from yelling. I knew this because Emily had called me, cackling as she recounted the scene. "He was losing his mind, Maddie," she had said between fits of laughter. Going on and on about loyalty, how Holloway owed him. Can you believe that? The audacity of this man. Oh, I could believe it. But his job was just the beginning, because Robert had built his entire life around status. Around being the guy with the best suits, the most expensive whiskey, the finest reservations at the trendiest restaurants. His career had been his identity. Without it, who was he? I had spent years playing the devoted wife, watching him flaunt, his connections, his power. Now, those connections were turning their backs on him. I didn't have to lift a finger. Word traveled fast. By the end of the week, his name was whispered in all the wrong circles. Business dinners he once commanded, invitations revoked. Friends he used to brag to, suddenly unavailable. No one wanted to be associated with a scandal. And the cherry on top? Taylor was gone. Daniel had dumped her in spectacular fashion. According to my sources, because yes, I had sources now, he had thrown her out of their apartment, tossed her belongings onto the street, and sent out a mass text to mutual friends detailing exactly why the wedding was canceled. Taylor had lost everything, and I imagined Robert had expected her to come running to him. She didn't. Instead, she vanished, probably licking her wounds, in some cheap hotel, trying to figure out how she had miscalculated so badly. And Robert? Robert was alone. It started with his job. Losing that was the first real punch to his ego, the moment he realized that I had been serious when I said he'd regret this. Holloway hadn't wasted time. By noon the next day, Robert was escorted out of the office like some lowly intern who had stolen company supplies. No farewell party, no sympathetic glances. Just a firm handshake from security and a box of his belongings. By the time he got home, his voice was raw from yelling. I knew this because Emily had called me, cackling, as she recounted the scene. He was losing his mind, Maddie, she had said between fits of laughter, going on and on about loyalty, how Holloway owed him. Can you believe that? The audacity of this man. Oh, I could believe it. But his job was just the beginning, because Robert had built his entire life around status, around being the guy with the best suits, the most expensive whiskey, the finest reservations at the trendiest restaurants. His career had been his identity. Without it, who was he? I had spent years playing the devoted wife, watching him flaunt his connections, his power. Now, those connections were turning their backs on him. I didn't have to lift a finger. Word traveled fast. By the end of the week, his name was whispered in all the wrong circles. Business dinners he once commanded, invitations revoked, friends he used to brag to, suddenly unavailable. No one wanted to be associated with a scandal, and the cherry on top, Taylor was gone. Daniel had dumped her in spectacular fashion. According to my sources, because yes, I had sources now, he had thrown her out of their apartment, tossed her belongings onto the street, and sent out a mass text to mutual friends detailing exactly why the wedding was canceled. Taylor had lost everything, and I imagined Robert had expected her to come running to him. She didn't. Instead, she vanished, probably licking her wounds in some cheap hotel, trying to figure out how she had miscalculated so badly. And Robert? Robert was alone. I didn't see him until days later. I was at the house, technically still our house, but not for long, packing the last of my things. The divorce was already in motion, my lawyer moving faster than Robert could react. Soon, everything would be split, and I would be gone. The sound of the front door opening sent a ripple of tension through me. I turned to see him standing there, looking like a man who had aged a decade in a week. His suit was wrinkled, his hair disheveled, and the usual cocky glint in his eyes. Gone. Madison, he said, his voice rough. I stared at him, waiting. He ran a hand down his face, exhaling slowly. I lost everything. There it was. The admission. The moment of realization. And yet, I felt nothing. No sympathy. No regret. Just a quiet sense of finality. I know, I said simply. He let out a dry, humorless laugh. I don't even have anywhere to go. Taylor's gone. My friends, he scoffed. Turns out they weren't really my friends. I lifted a box, setting it on the counter. That must be hard. His eyes snapped to mine. Madison, please, I raised an eyebrow. Please, what, Robert? He took a step forward, desperation creeping into his features. I messed up, okay? I should have never. He shook his head, as if trying to find the right words. I need you. I stared at him for a long moment. Once upon a time, I would have melted. I would have listened. But that woman? She didn't exist anymore. You need me? I repeated, voice soft but firm. He nodded quickly, hope flickering in his tired eyes. I exhaled, shaking my head. No, Robert. You need someone. And I'm not someone's second choice. The hope flickered out. You did this to yourself, I said, lifting another box. Now live with it. His shoulders slumped, the weight of his own actions finally settling in. He opened his mouth, but whatever words he had died before they could leave his lips. He knew. This was the end. I turned away, picking up my things, and walked out the door, leaving him in the ruins of the life he had destroyed. The silence was the worst part. After all the chaos, after the phone calls, the confrontations, the firestorm, I had ignited. There was nothing left but silence. I had won. I had taken everything from Robert, the job, the status, the mistress who thought she was untouchable. He was left with nothing, just as he had left me with nothing the moment he made his choice. And yet, as I sat in my new apartment, staring at the city skyline through the window, I felt empty. People think revenge is this grand, cinematic moment, that once you take down the person who wronged you, you'll feel whole again, satisfied, victorious. But no one talks about what comes after. No one tells you that after the anger fades, after the adrenaline wears off, there's just a void. Had spent weeks, maybe months, channeling every ounce of my pain into dismantling Robert's life. It had been my purpose, my fuel, the only thing keeping me upright when grief threatened to knock me down. But now there was nothing left to burn, and I didn't know what to do with myself. I scrolled through my phone, through the dozens of missed messages from friends, from Emily, all checking in. I hadn't responded to most of them, not because I didn't appreciate them, but because I didn't know what to say. How do you explain to someone that you got everything you wanted and still feel like something is missing? That even though Robert deserved everything that happened to him, even though I wouldn't change a single thing, I still felt hollow inside. Maybe it wasn't about him at all. Maybe it was about the fact that I had spent 10 years being someone's wife, someone's partner, someone's other half. And now, for the first time in a decade, I was just me. Just Madison. And I had no idea who that was anymore. I met Emily for drinks that night. She insisted. Said I needed to get out of my head before I spiraled too deep. So there we were, sitting in a dimly lit bar, her watching me carefully as I toyed with the rim of my glass. You look like hell, she said bluntly, sipping her cocktail. I huffed a laugh. Thanks. She set her drink down. Talk to me. I hesitated. I don't know what to say. Bullshit. She leaned in. You got your revenge, Maddie, and now you don't know what comes next. I exhaled. Yeah. She nodded like she had expected that. So figure it out. I frowned. It's not that simple. Of course it is. She waved a hand. You spent years making Robert your world, and then you spent months destroying his. But you never stopped to ask yourself, what do you want? The question lodged itself in my throat, because I didn't have an answer. I had been so consumed with making him pay, with making him feel even a fraction of what I had felt, that I had never stopped to think about me. What did I want? I had no idea. The night stretched on, the conversation shifting between light-hearted banter and quiet moments of reflection. At some point, Emily reached across the table, squeezing my hand. "You're allowed to feel lost," she said gently. "You're allowed to not have it all figured out." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "I just thought I'd feel better." "I know." She gave me a sad smile. "But revenge isn't healing. It never was." Her words hit me harder than I expected, because deep down I had known that. I had always known that. Destroying Robert had given me justice, but it hadn't given me peace. And peace was what I really needed. That night, as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I made a decision. It was time to stop looking back. I had spent enough time in the ruins of what once was. Now, it was time to start figuring out what came next. For me, for Madison, for the woman I was finally becoming. I woke up the next morning to sunlight filtering through the curtains. For the first time in months, I wasn't waking up to dread. There was no immediate sense of urgency, no plan to execute, no strategy to dismantle someone else's life. Just quiet. I let myself sink into the moment. The softness of the sheets, the distant hum of the city outside, the feeling of being alone. Not in the tragic, gut-wrenching way I had feared, but in a way that felt freeing. I had no obligations, no roles to play. For the first time in a decade, I was just Madison, and that was terrifying. Emily showed up unannounced later that day. A habit I had once found annoying but now found oddly comforting. She was carrying 2 coffees and a bag of croissants, setting them on my kitchen counter like she owned the place. "You're officially out of excuses," she announced. I raised an eyebrow. "Excuses for what?" She gestured around the apartment. "For hiding in here like a hermit. You got your revenge. You've had your existential crisis. Now it's time to actually live again." I sighed, rubbing my temples. "Emily, I appreciate the concern, but I'm not—" "No." She held up a finger. "No excuses. No but. You've been existing in survival mode for months, and I get it. Hell, I encouraged it. But that part is over." I hesitated. "I don't even know where to start." "Great," she said, taking a bite of a croissant. "That means you can start anywhere." I frowned, picking at the lid of my coffee cup. "It's not that simple." "Of course it is," she said, her voice softening. "Look, I know what it's like to have your life flipped upside down, to spend so much time focusing on someone else that you forget to focus on yourself. But that's over now." She nudged my arm. "You have a blank slate, Maddie. That's rare. That's powerful." I let out a slow breath. "A blank slate." She nodded. "So tell me, if you could do anything, go anywhere, be anyone, what would you do?" I stared at her. The question was so simple, so obvious, and yet I had no idea how to answer it. That night. I sat on my balcony, letting the city lights blur into a sea of gold and blue. I thought about Emily's question. What would I do? Who was I, outside of Robert's wife? I had spent 10 years molding myself into someone who fit into his world. The polished, presentable wife. The woman who smiled at corporate events, who played hostess, who bit her tongue when necessary. But none of that had been me. So who was I, really? I thought about the things I used to love before my life had been consumed by him. I thought about the books I never finished, the hobbies I had abandoned, the places I had dreamed of visiting before I had convinced myself that Robert's career was the only thing that mattered. And then, just like that, the answer came to me. I wanted to go. Not just physically, but mentally, emotionally. I wanted to go somewhere new, somewhere different. I wanted to rebuild from scratch, not in the shadow of my old life, but in the light of something completely my own. I reached for my phone before I could second-guess myself. Me. If you could travel anywhere right now, where would you go? Emily's response came within seconds. Emily. Paris. Obviously. Croissants and wine, duh. I laughed. Me. Okay, let's do it. There was a pause. Then, Emily. Wait, what? Me. I'm serious, let's go. Emily. Maddie, I was mostly joking. Are you actually considering this? Me. Yes. Another pause. Emily. Holy shit, you're serious. Me. Dead serious. Emily. Give me 24 hours, I'll book everything. I smiled, setting my phone down. For the first time in forever, I felt something close to excitement. 2 weeks later, I was standing in the middle of Montmartre, staring at the city skyline from the top of the Sacré-Cœur. The air was crisp, filled with the scent of fresh bread from a nearby bakery. Street musicians played soft melodies, their music weaving through the laughter of tourists and locals alike. It was beautiful, vibrant, alive, and for the first time in a long time, so was I. Emily nudged me with her elbow. Okay, tell me this. Isn't the best idea I've ever had, I laughed. You had? This was my idea. Details, she said, waving a hand. The point is, look at you. I glanced at her. What about me? She grinned. You're smiling, really smiling. I paused, letting the realization sink in. She was right. I had spent so much time surviving that I had forgotten what it felt like to just be. To exist without anger, without pain. I had thought revenge would be the thing that healed me, that breaking Robert down would somehow build me back up. But revenge had only been the fire. This, choosing myself, choosing happiness, this was the real healing. I looked at Emily, a slow smile spreading across my lips. I think I'm going to be okay. She clinked her glass against mine. Of course you are. And as I stood there, under the Parisian sky, I knew she was right. Because, for the first time since everything had fallen apart, I wasn't looking back. I was finally moving forward,